Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. I am Regina Roundtree with Kessa, and I'm so honored to be here with some of my favorite guys, Mavericks in Faith and Culture, and we are an arm of Every Black Life Matters. So we have some great conversation that we're going to have tonight. Um, just because it's our first time going, let's just introduce everyone. So it feels like Hollywood Squares here, huh? I'm dating
Hey,
myself.
Lonnie.
Yeah, I know, right? I'm like, hey,
Hey,
Lonnie. Okay, so we'll go clockwise. Lonnie,
Hey, I'm Lonnie Poindexter, and one of the members of the team, and always exciting to be a part of the team. And we do be the Mavericks of faith and culture because, well, we give it to you straight.
good.
I'm Neil Mauman. I'm one of the co-founders of Every Black Life Matters. I'm secretly black.
And African American.
I'm
He's the
African American.
only,
I
he's
am
the only
African American.
true African on the panel right now.
And I'm Kevin McGarry. I'm the co-founder as well of Every Black Life Matters. And we started Mavericks of Faith and Culture so we can really have another voice and opportunity to engage you. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you for joining us, everyone. Right. So there has been a lot going on, but we want to backtrack a little bit before we get into some of the current issues that are happening right now. We are people of faith. Every Black Life Matters, and more than just people of faith, but we consider that Jesus Christ, Yeshua HaMashiach, is our Lord and Savior. And we believe that the Bible is the final authority on culture, on politics, on everything that you would need. That is
Everything.
our instructions, right, on how we are to live life from the manufacturer, right? So that is the manual you should be reading daily. We want to address the issue that's been happening. It seems like we have waves of this, right? That you can't say that there's ever a decade that goes by where you're not seeing church leaders fall, right? Where you're not seeing corruption in the church. I mean, it goes back to the Old Testament, right? We can talk about corrupt kings, corrupt leaders, corrupt prophets, and things that happen. But there has been a wave. I think we had a little bit of silence for a while, and then there seems to be this wave. But there also have been reports about really how people are falling away from the church. And now we know from Matthew that Jesus said that there would be, that we would lose love towards one another and that we would fall away. But we're seeing this in bigger droves than I think than we ever have in our history. And so I'm going to start with Kevin and just give some of your thoughts on why you think that's happening.
Well, fundamentally, I think that we've tried to compromise too much with culture. There's right now a trend within Christendom called syncretism. And syncretism is the melding, if you will, of culture and faith. But when you try to sort of mesh and meld culture and faith, when culture is really pervasively demonic and faith is, purported, it is purely holy at its original context, then the trying to syncretize them really creates what Paul warned us about in Galatians 1:8 and 1:9, and that we're actually creating another gospel. So what we're seeing today is played out other gospels when people want to bring in, these different ways that they're going to accommodate, Gen Z and Gen X and build mega churches, because that's the wave of the future. That's a way to say whether you're successful or not is to actually have a big mega church. Then then that becomes the real object of our affection and the other gospel that we then build our churches around. So this is we're seeing this played out where we have big pastors of mega churches that are so tied with culture that they're trying to accommodate LGBTQ, homosexuals, and all of the other things, which would include other types of relationships that they get sucked into. I mean, you have TD Jakes and P. Diddy, and you have Robert Morris with his, dalliances with, earlier relationships that were underage. And you have Mike Bickle, who had, relationships that were in the church. But so a lot of this has to do with the bombardment of culture on top of, sort of layered on top of our faith foundations. And when we succumb to that, when we're seduced by it, when we're compelled by it, it can really cause us to fall. And we're seeing the falling of these megachurch pastors in a big way this year. So this is part of what we do. Now, we have the answer. Jesus said, "If I be lifted up, I'll draw all men unto myself." So if we can just lift up Jesus, that's he, and say, look, okay, you said if you be lifted up, and trust him to do his own work through our ministries. See, we don't have to take responsibility per se of our ministries when we give him the authority to do the work of his own church.
Right.
And so because so many are swayed by money, power, fame, culture, all these other things, then we're in the predicament we're in right now.
Got it. That's good. I wanted to go to Neil. Are you still there, Neil?
I'm here. Yeah.
Okay.
I'll keep going. I can't be on video right now, but go ahead. Yeah.
Okay. Lonnie, you want to go in, and then I have a few things I want to add.
Yeah, I'm just going to add that it's so poignant what Kevin has stated. This desire to be relatable we see existing within the church and within the pastoral. And I just remember some years ago when you started to see clergy, and I'm kind of old school, and so those might not agree with me that you always knew who the pastor was because he's the one that had the pastoral robe on. He had the uniform or the clerical collar and clergy. So you understood who he was. And then we went through this period of relatability where you started to see clergy people in the congregation dressing as well, because they wanted to be relatable so that folks would listen to them. And I kind of think that was a slippery slope. And then you have what you have today, all the things that Kevin laid out, where they're just, they're more than relatable. They're completely intermingled with the things that Scripture says that you don't do. And I would say that probably they didn't start out that way, but it is a slippery slope. And over time, you can end up where, like you have today, the individuals that Kevin mentioned in other churches. When I think of Joel Osteen's church and how they're a humongous church, and but I just say that he's a motivational speaker. Folks get upset when I say that. I say, well, he's like, you go out and sign up for these things and they tell you how to be a better business person or a better person or how to catch that girl or whatever it is, but you're a motivational speaker, but you don't really see the church impacting the community, which is what we're about. And so we speak on that and what a Christian army should be doing. I think that's the other thing that the church has kind of forgotten. We're not a fraternity or a sorority. We are an army.
Carl had a great point when he brought up Luke 12:2-3. He said, "For there's nothing covered that shall not be revealed, neither hid that shall not be known. Therefore, whatsoever you've spoken in darkness shall be heard in the light, and that which you have spoken in the ear and closet shall be proclaimed upon the housetops. Carl, thank you so much for sharing that. Neil, you're next.
Well, I think the major problem we have here, in addition to all this, is the cult of personality. We have built these up, a lot of these pastors up into, people aren't going to church to hear the word, they're going to church to hear what the pastor thinks of the word, right? And there are good, I know there are many churches where the pastors are great, but they're teaching you what the word says, right? But a lot of times you end up with, no, these pastors are, this is what I say, this is what I think the word says, not what I shouldn't say what I think. This is what I think the word should say, kind of thing. And it becomes a cult of personality. And so what happens with the cult of personality is then the pastor, in his own mind, has elevated himself. I built this church. This is my church. This is all my doing. And so first of all, naturally, the evil one's going to go after him, right? So like, if I can bring this guy down, I can affect a lot more people than if I bring the little guy down. Not to say the little guys aren't going down too. It's just that we don't hear about them. They are going down. But he's definitely going to target these guys. So these guys need to be even more careful about what they're doing and what they're saying. And when you look at their dalliances and where they've fallen, you're like, how stupid can you be, right? And you ask yourself, how stupid can you be? Here's a guy who's a great manager. He's a great, supposedly, teacher. He's a great marketing. He's great at all these things. And yet he falls for a Bathsheba. Hey, he falls for a Delilah, how many times? I mean, and again, to be fair, we've seen this before. I mean, how many times did Delilah cheat on Samson? And at what point did he go, you're trying to kill me, woman? And he still does it again, right? So there is something in there, something that tweaks with a man's psyche, with his ego. And Samson, we know, had a huge ego, that God can still use them, but they're going to die in the process. They're going to fall in the process. And I think that we need to watch out for that our faith does not fall with their faith. I remember I used to go to a very large church in California, and when the pastor stepped down for something that happened again, similarly, years before, the church went from like 7,000 to like 600, right? And I didn't change. I'm like, I wasn't coming to this church for the pastor. I was coming to church for the family. I was coming to church for the other teachers and for the other learning and everything I was teaching. All that. And yet these guys are leaving the church because of this. I'm like, so what? So he's gone. Is that what attracted you to this church? That should not be the case.
And it's interesting. Go ahead, Kevin.
One last point I want to make about that, especially with Carl's verse there, is we have to, contextualize that we have a culture that is demonically infused, and so it's demonic, fundamentally, especially here in the United States. Okay, so we have a foe that hates us, and as a matter of fact, the Bible describes he wants to steal, kill, and destroy us. So he wants to steal our destinies. He wants to kill us, if not, actually, literally, he wants to kill any, opportunities we may have, any, leverage that we will have with people. And he wants to utterly destroy us. So it's not, this is not that peculiar, because we're so tied with trying to mingle with culture, and the demonic realm says, oh, okay, good. I'm glad you're here, because at some point I'm going to steal, kill, and destroy you, because we're actually ingratiating it, inviting it into our, what should be a pure gospel, a pure faith, and that kind of thing. So that's that was a good verse there, Carl. That's good.
And the thing that when we talk about why leaders are falling, and we don't want to ignore the fact that there are female leaders that have fallen as well.
Oh, yeah.
It all goes back to what we saw happen in the Garden of Eden. I always want to go back to this, because the thing that the enemy, evil, did was question the authority of God. Did God say? And it always comes down to our ego versus whether or not we are going to submit to the will of our manufacturer, of our creator. And so whenever our will bumps up against the will of our creator, if we're not willing to, as your book says, right, Kevin, to be a servant and a slave, then we're going to have some real problems. But, just twisting the idea, there's your book. Make sure you guys get it. It's on Amazon, so Free to Be a Servant and Slave, Kevin's new book. You know, the thing that I'm going to dabble into something I think that Neil's new book, when it comes out, is going to help us with. We've also really been seeing this kind of slide that I've never seen before, where we see African Americans falling away from this church in the sense of, I mean, we've always had conversations about white Jesus, right? And blacks and slavery and how Christianity came across the world, right? But you know, now we have just Instagram and Facebook, and we have ways to get the message out there. And so there have been such large conversations about, is Christianity a white man's religion, right? And so we've been starting to see, especially within the Black church, this huge fall away. And not that corrupt leaders are not in the white church, they're in the white, and I mean, it all ethnicities have corrupt church leaders that have fallen. But what one of the articles that we saw was this real slide away of Black Christians away from the church and deciding to fellowship at home, to just, God is in my heart. I have some ideas on that, but Neil, you want to give a few comments?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think it's really, there's a funny story I tell sometimes to audiences when I'm obviously of Indian origin, born and brought up in Africa. But when I first met my father-in-law, my wife is white, hails back. She's got German and Irish and Scottish and English ancestry, right? The last name is Kent, Kent, England, right? Funny story. My mother-in-law's name is Lois Kent, so the wife of Superman. But so I met my in-laws for the first time. They weren't my in-laws at the time. Obviously, I was just dating my wife, and I met my future father-in-law, and he said, "Oh, how long has your family been Christian?" Mm-hmm. And I, tongue in cheek, I said, "Well, a lot longer than yours." The point is, look, my family dates its heritage back to 51 AD when St. Thomas came to India and converted a bunch of pagans there to Christianity, right? One of the earliest converts in the Bible here is the guy from Ethiopia, right? I mean, this is not a white man's religion. And so my father-in-law's family probably became Christian maybe in 1200 AD. We have 1,000 years on them, right? So right. Yeah, how can you even think this is a white man's religion when in reality this has been a religion for the major part of the world? Yes, it didn't spread until Constantine when it really took off, right? But before that, remember North Africa, all those what we call Arabs now today were all Christians. Most of the Middle East was Christian, and going back into Asia was Christian. There's even, we find the Assyrian Christians, and then we find the Iraqi Christians, and you can go all the way back there. So the idea that it's a white man's religion is just ludicrous because people who say that obviously have no idea of history.
Right, but I think also what they're getting at is the fact that I think they only stop at slavery. And you guys know that I've been living abroad for a while, and so I'm in Africa right now. I live in Kenya. And as I've traveled, lived in Vietnam for 4.5 years, and then, been in different continents, it's amazing to me the way that Christianity is so ingrained in some nations. Right. I'm not just talking like a community, but when the president prays, when I go to stores and they're playing gospel music, this is public, right? In Africa. And many African nations will consider themselves, there's some that consider themselves Muslim, but there are some that really consider themselves Christians. And just the values and the faith system that individuals have is amazing to me. But what shocks me is that when you get into the US, Black Americans who've never left never left the U.S. somehow feel that being Black is something that only happened 200 years ago, when slavery happened, and their whole mindset is there. And because of that, they can only relate to their skin color based on the cultural things that happened in history, which is so limiting. And if you start that way, right, where you only base yourself on what history or what some of culture has done to you before, and we've talked about forgiveness a lot, right? And how we need to have those things. As we did in our last conversation, we talked about reparations and we talked about the need to move beyond that. But my point is just that when we see the conversations about white man's religion and about Jesus being white and how it was used to put us in bondage, it's like so unfortunate that you forget there's 4,000 years of history of Elohim walking with his people.
Right.
Mhm.
And if all you can do is focus on just this, you have really limited yourself. Right?
And again, this is partly the fault of the educational system, right? They teach I mean, I understand they teach an American centric, but now they're teaching a slave centric sort of teaching of America and the world. I mean, when I grew up in Africa, and to us, England was always in the center of the map. It wasn't until I came to America that suddenly the United States is in the center of the map, right? And then they cut Asia in half so they can fit on both sides. They're like, wait a minute,
Right.
it doesn't lend itself to that. But so which is understandable. I got nothing wrong with that. But you got to teach the whole history. You got to teach the understanding. You're going to teach
That's it.
You got to teach all of it, right?
But
That's what I say.
and to add to that, Neil, what the other part of it is teaching history and the whole part of history. But the other thing is we now have these Black centric religions, other gospels that Paul talked about in Galatians 1:8, 1:9, cursed gospels, right? That are like Black Hebrew Israelites on the ascension, big time, right? We got Islam, Nation of Islam on the ascension, right? And then you have Black liberation theology, James Cone and his grotesque theology, right? All Black centric, not gospel centric.
Right.
The gospel is infused a little bit here and there, but it's mostly Black centric ideology that's really racist and hateful, especially towards whites. So, and that's because it's not founded principally on anything other than Marxism, especially for Black liberation theology. It's all Marxism, South American Marxism. Obviously Nation of Islam and Black Hebrew Israelites, they're infused with just other notions and ideas and theories about things, but they're still not. Basically what they said is what Jesus did for everyone is not good enough. That's what they're saying. Now they could say, oh no, I'm not saying that, Kevin. No, the cross is good enough, it's sufficient. But why do you have to make up a whole nother gospel that points strictly to Blackness or whiteness? I mean, I don't understand. If what Jesus did is sufficient and more than sufficient, if the cross is sufficient, then stand on that, bro. Stand on Ephesians 2. It talks about all the barriers being broke down between male, female, Jew, Gentile, and everybody. Galatians 3, 28, 26, 28 talks about the same thing. Why don't you stand on those? Why don't you stand on Matthew 5:44, love, even those that despitefully use. There's too many things that talk about love, forgiveness, unity, and yet we have these other gospels that talk about division, hate. We got to hate the white man because they are. Well, obviously, what Jesus did is not sufficient. The gospel's not good enough for you, So.
That is so true, and they can in their minds they can verify their belief systems based on what they see as it relates to history. But as you gentlemen were saying, you got to cover all of history, and the Black Hebrew Israelites are blinded to aspects of history that they just ignore. And then what fascinates me is how the church has jumped on it because of the church, and I'm generalizing here, is ignorant in that area. They do not understand all history because it's not this thing. The thing that gets me is that within the church community, for folks who have the darker paint job, that they see things from the viewpoint that the only time anything bad happened in society was what happened to Black people. And when you take into account historically what took place with all people, because everybody's been on the negative end of whatever because of man's inhumanity to man, and they run with that. Well, a lot of you don't understand what they did to us. I says, whoa, 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 whoa. They, do you not understand? And Kevin, you and Neil cover this in your books and what have you, I think, to the point where it's academic. And that's why I love hitting folks in the face with the book, not literally, but showing them, here's history. Here's what really happened. How can you think that you are a perpetual, or your people are a perpetual victim? And the reason why that your people are in the state that they're in is because of what was done to you back when we came over here in the bottom of ships. But when you look at the history, you see that from the time we were emancipated, we had record increases of just learning basic things like English, creating schools and doctors and hospitals and all these things that in our community, though we were separated, we attained. How did we do that? It was faith in the one true God, understanding that not some man because he looks different from you, regardless of what happened historically within his family, what his family did, and all those people are dead and gone now. But it frustrates me to no end when I'm talking to folks and otherwise intelligent people, but they go blind in this area or go deaf in this area, and they run with this. It's amazing to me to see.
Well, I mean, part of the problem, as you hit on it, is they want there are two groups of people here. One is the people who want power, and the way they create power is by creating a victim class mentality in their followers, so that they can now get. And it's the same thing happening with Hamas, right? It's like if Hamas would just focus on bringing economic relief. I mean, they've got a wonderful place right on the Mediterranean. It could be the tourist attraction for the entire world, or at least all of Europe. Hey, come and have a great trip in Gaza. We got casinos, we got this, we got that, we got the best food, we got all this stuff. But no, because then the wealth gets distributed. What they want, what the leaders of Hamas want, is they want the power and the money. The billions of dollars that have gone into Gaza have gone into kill people. And why? Because they want a victim class, and they've created a victim class mentality. They need that. It's the same thing that's happening with these. We call them race baiters. You know, the Al Sharptons, if you will, of the world. Because without that, they have no power. They have nothing to sell but fear. And so this is what they're doing. And the reality is that, I mean, look, white people have been discriminated against, maybe not as much, but certainly for when the Moors went into Spain. When the Muslims went into Spain and wiped out all the Christians in North Africa, went into Spain, started wiping them out. Guess what? If you weren't dark-skinned like the Moors, you were discriminated against. When the Sudanese people went in and killed all the Mediterranean Egyptians, took over from the pharaohs, they discriminated against the lighter-skinned Mediterranean Egyptians, right? I mean, this has gone on over and over and over again. It's in reverse both ways. So I think the reality is that, as you said, it's not color that makes a difference. It's humans hating other humans and wanting power that makes a difference. And once we understand that, we understand why the Bible says, no, all men are created evil. By the way, the Bible is the only thing that says that. There's no other book that says that. Quran doesn't say. The Bhagavad Gita has caste systems in it. Buddhism doesn't have a God, so you can't insist on anything. You go through all these religions, none of them have the equality of mankind except for Christianity. And I always laugh when people come and say, oh, you want to merge the Bible with the Constitution, we're supposed to have a wall of separation between the church and the state. Buddy, if it wasn't for the Bible, you wouldn't have that line in the Declaration of Independence that says all men are created equal. Which men are created equal? By their creator. Which creator? Only the Christian creator, buddy.
Powerful.
All right.
What hit me, let me just comment here. Neil, you said something that really chimed in with me, is the real estate where the Palestinians are. Gaza, that area. Man, it would be like it is in Israel. It's right on the Mediterranean. Hey, we've been there. The weather is fantastic, just like California for the most part. but there's
Yeah.
too much war and fighting, so they have to have the victim class. They have to keep them impoverished. You gotta have them no hospitals or anything. But yet in good old Israel, things are booming economically that way.
And what's even
Yep.
better, Israel, things are doing so well that the cost of living is expensive in Israel. You want to hire a person, you pay them 3 times as much. If they started a factory, it would be like Mexico here. Like, hey, they could be making cars and all this. Israel has this great manufacturing plant. You could be manufacturing in Gaza for 1/3 of the cost and selling it to Israel. But no, we want to kill people instead.
Wow.
Wow. So let us transition into kind of this next topic, because we're talking about war, we're talking about mentality, we're talking about prejudice on skin color, but let's switch over to gender, shall we? Because um, again, I always like to go back to Genesis, because we can learn so much about everything if we go back
Yeah.
to Genesis. So when not only did evil question, did God really say? We see there that if we look at history, the war on women really started there. And I'll just say before I toss it to Kevin, because he's wrote a book on it. But what I do just want to point out is that, often we misunderstand how sin entered into humanity, and we want to say, that it was Eve. But if you look throughout the Bible, sin is never attributed to Eve, it's always to Adam. Adam was the one that sinned. And so what do? Is we blame, right? And so patriarchal societies have just decided that, well, it's the woman's fault. And so therefore women have been treated as less than, when that was never the case, and how God created the earth, and how the order in which, when he finally brought female and woman in, everything was done for her. Everything was established, and she was created and set next to the ruler. She was never set under his feet, right? She was set there to help and be a partner to. And so when we think about this, where we're talking about war and the ethnicity and racism that we're having, and even the failure of the church, right, to move towards this idea of culture, we've seen what has happened because we've been that way, that the whole transgender movement has come in. And I want to talk about it a little bit now, because it maybe the noise of it has settled down, but we really should still be awake. So, Kevin, like, share with us a little bit from your book and War on Women, and what you think is really happening right now in culture.
Yeah, so the war on women, if you read closely, Genesis 3:15 talks about there will be enmity or war, or chaos or calamity between you. It's God giving the consequences to Satan and to Eve. He says there will be war, enmity, chaos, calamity between you, the serpent, and the woman and her offspring. So from that time, there's been an onslaught. Not just since woman is the vessel that's being used to birth mankind. So the context is, it's not a personal thing with Eve, it's a humanity thing. All humanity is birthed through Eve.
Mhm.
So it was then Satan's, he was like, oh, like, that's right. And I'm going to make sure that all the seed of the women are going to be jacked up from here on out. And so he started this war on mankind, right? Obviously, women have suffered horribly, with all types of things throughout the ages. But mankind generally, and especially the seed, the child, because you had, child sacrifices, Balaam and Moloch, and all of those child sacrifices in ancient times, all the way through to, more, modern times, where you then get, the feminism movement, you get, eugenics, and then abortion, and all of those things specifically targeted to erase
Mhm.
children.
Mhm.
And so this is not like we haven't arrived at a viral moment. The key takeaway here is I don't want people to think that, hey, just as we evolved in, humanity evolved over time, we became more sophisticated, and we actually came up with a unique idea that we can or should, think about when we have children, when we don't, and be clever about just if it's a fetus, then we can get rid of it because it's not a convenient time. That is not what happened. It's strategic.
Mm.
Satan has always had his pedal to the metal on trying to exterminate, delete all humanity, but especially the children, because then if he can delete them one way by abortion in our context, then that takes a lot of potential souls off the map, and so
Mhm.
he released them. And also he knows that God spent so much time down to the intricate details of hairs in the head in the womb on each individual child. So he's
Mhm.
saying, he's spitting on God, saying, look, I'm as you produce them, I'm getting rid of them because your people are letting me do this. They bow into
Mhm.
me and let me be. And
Mhm.
so that's kind of the big affront. But then here's the other part. When children then are confused about, well, maybe I'm male, maybe I'm female, maybe I'm a furry, maybe I'm this or that, then those children start going down a path that then also erases their ability to procreate, right?
Mhm.
So he's taking them off the table. He can't take them off the table in the womb. After they're here, he's confusing so many of them so much that they're taken off the table in the sense that they're homosexual or they're LGBTQ or they're trans and they don't know. Therefore, they're also not going to procreate. So this is
Mhm.
just Satan's onslaught against humanity, taking massive amounts of people, millions, billions off the table by virtue of confusion, abortion, and all kinds of other schemes that are directed at the woman and her offspring. So he's
Mhm.
confusing women and encouraging them to do the abortion. He's then taking children immediately off the map, and he's confusing children to not even procreate. That then takes that other next generation off the map. This is all purely demonic, and it's impacting in every way all
Mhm.
of humanity. And so I hope we begin to see a little bit differently about this. That it's not just a convenience issue. And this is strategic, it's satanic, and it always has been since the beginning of mankind.
And if you think back, and there's a theory here that the reason why Satan rebelled, because he and the angels were the first, first one of the first creations, the most majestic, and Satan was, Lucifer was, one of the theological concepts is that there were three branches, and Michael and Gabriel and Lucifer, and a third of the angels were with Lucifer, and so when God created mankind, he displaced the angels from that top position
Mhm.
because he says that that we will be greater than angels. So Lucifer knows we are going to replace him. Again, this is just a theory. It's not I'm not, don't make a religion out of it. But God was going to replace us, or is replacing angels with humans, and Satan rebels at this. And his job now, his goal now, he knows he can't win. I mean, if you ever wondered, well, what is Satan going to get out of this? He knows he can't beat infinite God.
Mhm.
So what's he going to get out of it? He hates God so much that he wants to be a thorn in his side as long as he can. And
Mhm.
so what we see is this possibilities of, look, I am going to destroy humanity the best I can. I am going to end humanity. Well, what's one way to end humanity? Bring that reproduction rate down below 1 point, what it is, 1.2, whatever it is that it needs to be. So what are the different ways? Homosexuality, lesbianism, transgenderism, go down, child sacrifice, having women childless marriage, having women wait longer and longer to have, to have children. Think all this stuff, if you think about it, plays right into that. How do I
Mhm.
make humanity go extinct? And that is one of the worries that we have, not the population bomb, but the depopulation bomb. If man, like what the Japanese are below. In fact, there's a worry that the African Americans in America are below reproduction rate, right? Because they're below 1.2 because they're being killed, not because they aren't
Yeah.
having babies, but because the babies are being killed before they can be born. And so this kind of ties into that. Is Satan focusing on women from the Bible, from the Old Testament? I will put an enmity between you and the women right there, just to destroy the race of man.
That's good. That's good. And I want to slow down and repeat what Kevin brought to the forefront. When we go back and we read in Genesis, when God said that there would be enmity between your seed and between the woman's seed and between evil, we need to understand that that is not an indictment as if Eve was being punished for these things, as much as it was a statement to evil that this is what is going to defeat you, right? And you would think that humanity would be like, oh, he uncovered for us, how we can defeat the enemy or how he will be defeated. Let's not play into his hand, right?
Right.
Let's
The
not come
strategy
into
for spiritual
alignment.
warfare.
Right. Let's not come
exactly.
into agreement with that. And then, but we don't do that because we immediately see this very patriarchal system set up from that time where, and if you go back to that time and study, actually, women were quite powerful, right?
Oh, yeah.
It was the men that sat at the gate and they did business, and the women did business, right? They bought and sold. Everyone reads Proverbs 31:10, and I want to be a Proverbs woman, And if you look at how Abraham submitted to Sarah, if you look at the way that women had roles, it wasn't always about them being just weak and they should be a bug on the bottom of your shoe, right? If we go back and we study the culture, but as things have shifted, and then we look at just across the world, just how women have been treated. They're the highest as far as sex trafficking and prostitution, domestic violence, rape and sexual assault. And I'm not saying that that does not happen to men. We're not saying that, but we're
Right.
looking at the proponents and the high level of what's happening with women. And you would think that the church of all things, that we would understand that, right? We fast for 40 days. We have shut-ins, we want to change the political landscape. We want to clean up drugs and crime in our community. And it's like, if you would just go back to Genesis and see that this warfare between evil and women is really what's destroying your community, we could see such an increase and a change in the way that the church has effect, even within the community. But, we still have many churches where women are very much treated like they can't teach, they can't talk. You just sit there and you work in the nursery, right? And yet we also see the very reverse of that, where women come across so strong, very hyper masculine, that it does the exact same thing, right? It totally flips over the way that God had intended. And the thing we need to think about, and we could stay on this topic for so long, but we do want to move to our last topic, and I'm kind of sliding us into that, is this idea, not this idea, but the fact that evil has always been existing, right? And that the subtletyness of how he brings about war upon humanity, upon leaders. We saw in the church, we see it, the war with women. And we want to kind of tie this into the different type of wars that we're seeing upon leaders, our leaders today. And, I know that we'll have people listening who have many different ideas about former President Donald Trump and his reelection bid. But what we want to do is we want to step back from the assassination attempt and just kind of look at the trajectory of war that has been happening against this man from the get-go. I'm going to toss it to, we'll go in order, Kevin, Lonnie, and Neil, and we'll do it that way, and then we'll have to wrap up our call. But go ahead, Kevin.
Yeah, so the war on him started very early when he first came down those escalators. Now you got to remember that President Trump he had rappers rapping about him for decades. He was, Mother Teresa, what's her name? Rosa Parks, Muhammad Ali, Jesse Jackson, all these guys. He was the New York guy, right? That hung out with these folks. And they all had favorable opinions about him. When he came down the escalator and said he was running Republican, that was when everything switched. So it was like a real spiritual onslaught against him. It was supernatural, and it's only supernatural because it's the level of vitriol is not explained. It makes no sense. It's not logical. That's why it's something more than just, hey, I don't like how he said this or did this. This is literal hatred towards a person and everyone associated with him and everyone in his family and every attorney. It's like, this is unbelievable. Nobody's been persecuted like this in America and that I know of. But
not a white person either, right?
Not a white person, exactly.
Right.
So he and a billionaire at that. So it started with him just making the proclamation he's running Republican. Then he said, and then that's when they started spying on him. Obama started immediately spying on him. All right, Obama administration started immediately spying. Then they set him up with various charges for impeachment. When he took office, day one they said, we're going to impeach you. So he knew that was coming. Then they kept, doing, and then after he left office, then of course you have lawfare, all these lawsuits from all over the place, because they knew they can't beat him. They have to either put him in prison or try to make him so crazy that he's just tired of spending his money trying to defend himself. He just says, forget it, it's not worth it. So they tried to make his life miserable, and it only made him stronger and more resolved, and the people around him stronger and more resolved. And now we have this. And then, of course, a week and a half ago or so, he gets the attempted assassination. So this is very, very serious. It is, in my opinion, spiritual, because all you got to do is say his name and people just go crazy. It's like a whole different person. They go crazy. So it can't be explained logically. And when you can't explain it logically, it's a spiritual thing. And it's
spiritual. Yeah.
It's beyond that. So.
Lonnie.
Yeah, so very true, Kevin. It's spiritual, and evil is arrogant enough to think that it can win utilizing the tools it has, its availability to bring about its agenda. And he wasn't a part of the juggernaut. Washington, D.C. He wasn't a group. He's an independent businessman. And as one of the pastors in our network says, that he was a blue-collar billionaire. So he was a different animal, but they didn't discover what was within him. God knows what's in somebody. And then I was looking for the quote from Bishop Wooten, and Kevin, you know Bishop Wooten out of North Carolina.
Oh yeah,
and he's a senior pastor with the Church of God in Christ, and one of the fastest growing Black dominations in America, if not globally. And if you look at his quote, which is on, they haven't taken it down. It's in social media. He said that what he saw that man do when he was shot and collapsed, and then discovered that, okay, what happened to me? And blood trickling down his face, and had the resolve to stand up amidst the Secret Service people on having, hold his fist up and say, fight, 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 fight. He says that told him something about the measure of the man. He's not a common man. This is a man who is indeed a fighter. And we've written about this, when I was comparing him to iconic figures in history. individuals who are just wired differently, and they will stand up and fight. They will push back. And the anti-God crowd is not used to that. They're used to people knuckling under if they put enough pressure on them. This individual's not that kind of individual. So what it has done is it's backfired, I think, on the anti-God crowd, in that people of all colors and from every fashion, if you will, are looking at that, and it's telling them something, like it told Bishop Wooten. And I think that's
Mhm.
the thing that it's done. And for me, personally, it tells me, I said, okay, if that many people are against them, and that many folks are trying to destroy him, and what flavor they have, literally trying to kill him, that says something about who this individual is. And therefore, I strongly believe, just as God protected him and spared his life with the attempted assassination, he's protecting him now going forward. And so it's something kind of, it gives, at least for me, it gives me hope about, the plight of our nation and what have you, because, God's still on the throne. I think a lot of folks said America's written off and it's a done deal. And Kevin and you, Neil, have seen all the posts that folks have written America off. I still feel that God has love for this nation, because there is somebody that will stand up and push back. Just like you, Neil, just like you, Kevin, and you, Regina. You guys do that as well from your little bully pulpits, if you will.
Right.
Yeah.
Neil, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing that's very interesting about Trump is he's very similar to the nation of Israel,
Ah,
right? He's not perfect. They're not
yep.
perfect. Yet there's this unreasonable anger, and it's spiritual. It really is spiritual. I mean, there's some visceral, and when you start pushing in well, why? What, like, oh, he's a racist. I'm like, well, what about Jesse Jackson? He thought Trump was one of the greatest people in the world because Trump had helped all the black, all his efforts back when he was doing Rainbow Push and all that stuff, and in fact he gave him awards and stuff like that. And yet you think suddenly he becomes a racist overnight, and their response is to attack you further and to attack him further. It's not logical, it's emotional. Now I want to explain this in a sense, because for the longest time I would, and I still try to argue, I don't think it's a cause that has no benefit, but I think you have to understand it and approach it in a different way. The reason why we're seeing this is not because it's a logical response to him. It's because these folks have been brainwashed into thinking a certain way, right? Now, you all know that Trump derangement syndrome, right? It's the same as Israeli derangement syndrome. It doesn't matter that the Israelis have not done, they were not the ones who attacked Hamas. It doesn't matter that Hamas wants to kill all the Israelis. It's, oh no, this is, it doesn't matter that when they say from the river to the sea, they don't know which river, they don't know which sea, right? But they want to say river to the sea. They don't understand what that means, right? They just hate him, and they hate him for the reason. And here's how Jordan Peterson put it. Because for the longest time I was like, this doesn't make sense. How can people who are I would have these arguments with engineers, right? So these guys aren't idiots, right? They're engineers. They're logically thinking. But the minute Trump comes up, they're like, it's just like they get overcome by demons or something. And I figured out Jordan Peterson kind of explains some of it, and that's how I figured out. He says you have to understand that they don't think logically in certain areas. When it comes to politics, it's not about logic, it's about tribes. Their tribe believes X. Your tribe believes Y. It doesn't matter if you're right or wrong. This is what our tribe believes. Now, who determines what the way the tribes should believe? Who determines what they believe? Nobody knows. And there might be manipulators behind the things they're doing. And not everything works. Sometimes, they like the tribe believed that Biden was the answer. Suddenly somebody made the decision, Obama made the decision, Biden wasn't the answer. So Biden throws out, oh no, Kamala Harris is the answer, is replacing me. And they're like, wait, we didn't tell you to say that. And there's this big fight going on. So the tribe does have its problems. But when the tribe settles, whoever the masses of the tribe, then all the peons below are like, well, the tribe has said this, and so that's what is right, and you are evil if you disagree with the tribe. And it doesn't matter what you believe, because you're from a different tribe, you're wrong. And so this is the argument you get, and you've got to break that down. You've got to break them to think, hang on. Are you blindly following your tribe? Who dictated that to you? And then they'll try to argue like, okay, so you do want to argue. Now, is it going to be successful? I don't know. A lot of times it isn't, because they're such in this emotional, frantic stage that you can't discuss it with them. And you've seen that with Charlie Kirk on campus, right? And I always say, when I'm arguing with an atheist, I'm not trying to convince the atheist to be a theist. I'm trying to argue and explain to all the people listening to the argument what the truth is, because that's my target, not the atheist, because the atheist has decided that God does not exist, not because there evidence is that God does not exist, but because he doesn't want God to exist. And so what I'm really talking about the other people who are listening in. And the same way, when you get into these discussions, which you will, it's really about the other people.
That's good. I was thinking Hatfields and McCoys, I was thinking even in Ireland, the North and the South, so many countries you have tribal wars, because we are tribes, right?
Yeah.
But we weren't necessarily meant to always fight against each other, but there's going to be disagreements among tribes, right? And the determination is who is our moral compass? Who is the moral lawgiver, as you say, Neil, right? And when you remind us that we submit everything to Elohim, to God. And believe us, we are not trying to say that Trump is God, that Trump is holy, that he's a prophet or our savior, right? We're not talking about that. Let's just talk about an individual human who made a statement and then everything just flipped over. Everything just went chaotic. And I think even for some Black people who've been watching, they're persecuting him like he was Black, right? You have this wealthy white guy who's done many wonderful things, and then they're looking at America and FBI and former president coming after this man, as we have seen, racial targeting, right? And we're looking like, okay, we know he's not Black, but there's something going on here. Why you really, really, really don't like him. And I can see why Black people, a lot of younger Black people, have shifted in just watching, because it's like, if you're targeting him like this, I can relate. I understand. And I'm not trying to say we're justifying victim mentality. That's not what we're talking about.
No. But the reality is, and as I'll explain in my book, there is a targeting of Blacks. There's definitely a targeting of Blacks. What we have to understand is, why are Blacks targeted? And one of the reasons, as I explain in the book, is because Blacks happen to do the most crime percentage-wise, right? But that's not all the Blacks. That's like 3% of the Blacks, right? So what's happening is, by default, people are getting this bias because of a small population. I mean, it's the same thing. I say, as a book will say, look, if every time you met an Indian, there was nothing on it, but every time you watched an Indian on TV, he happened to be this crook. At some point, that's going to transfer to me, because you're going to get this guy. But what happens, it transfers in the opposite. Every time you've met an Indian, he's an engineer or a doctor, right? So everybody thinks Indians are smart. That's not true at all. Go to India. You'll see they're not smart. They're actually very stupid. Right? Like, they're more stupid than Americans in many cases, right? But the difference is, the people who came here were the only people who came here were engineers and doctors. And so that bias is now transferred to Indians. I'm happy about it. But you have the reverse of Blacks, right? You have that small thing on the bias. And we know exactly why that happens, and I'll explain in the book. But you have that small segment, and that's transferring to all the other Blacks. And and how do we change that? How do you break that? And that's why the book is called How to End Racism in America.
Oh, we're going to have some good conversations about that. All right. So, just again, it's like, how did we get to how did we get to people leaving the church and corrupt church leaders we're ending our conversation talking about the war on Trump, right? And really, what we hope that you're noticing is this thread of evil, this scarlet thread, if you will, of evil that has never left. It has never left our society. It is woven into too many fabrics of our life. And we just are hoping that you'll just stop and think like, if we go back and look at Genesis and we compare the things that are happening in our world. I know sometimes we like to start with the Gospels, but the Gospels all started with Genesis, right? Because I always say Jesus wasn't reading Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John when he was walking the earth, right? He was reading the Torah. And so all the lessons and things that he taught, where did he get those from? And so when we go back and we look on how to apply the word of God to our life, there's so much that if we just stopped and held up what you believe against what does scripture say, that you could see evil is so clear. And that's all we want to point out to you, is to realize that evil is there in many different forms, and do not be deceived, right? And I think I love that scripture that there it is. That scripture that Carl shared with us. And that's what we're trying to do, right?
That's right.
We need to reveal some things that have been hidden. And so anyone have any last words that they want to say before we close out? All right, then.
No, just a great session.
So join us again. We'll be back. We try to do it on the second and the fourth Monday of every month, but we'll put announcements out on our social media platforms. And so if you've enjoyed what you've been watching, please share this stream with some friends, leave your comments, and suggest to us any topics that you'd love to see us discuss.